You're listening to the Exceptional Girls Podcast, and I'm your host, Julie Withrow. As a mom who raised a twice exceptional young daughter, I know both the joys and the challenges of parenting a child who thinks, learns, and experiences the world differently. I also know how lonely it can feel and how long it can take to get answers. I created this podcast to increase awareness, understanding, and acceptance of female neurodivergence. In doing so, I hope to smooth the path for other families. Please join me for expert interviews and candid conversations about giftedness, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, and more. Let's learn together how we can make sure our exceptional girls feel seen, supported, and celebrated. In this episode of the Exceptional Girls Podcast, you'll hear from Dr. Jessica Potts, the curriculum coordinator at Davidson Academy Online. We talk about the challenges families often face when trying to find the right learning environment for their gifted or twice exceptional child, and why online schools can be a great option. Dr. Potts earned a doctorate from the University of Nevada, Reno in secondary education with an emphasis on gifted education and online learning. Her research focuses on the intersection of these two fields, and she authored a chapter in a book on gifted underachievement, as well as publishing articles in Gifted Child Quarterly, Gifted Child Today, Parenting for High Potential, Teaching for High Potential, and EdWeek. Dr. Potts has presented at numerous conferences and delivered webinars and workshops both online and in person on topics including online pedagogy, gifted education, social emotional learning, and parent engagement. She and her husband live in the Czech Republic with their sons. Listen in as Dr. Potts shares the signs to look for that a traditional classroom may not be the best fit for your child, and how factors like anxiety or executive function struggles can influence school choice. She also shares practical tips for evaluating both academic rigor and social emotional support, even in an online school setting. Whether you're just beginning your child's educational journey or actively searching for a new school, this conversation offers research-informed insights and actionable guidance to help you make the best educational decisions for your gifted or 2E student. Hi, Dr. Potts. Thanks so much for being on the podcast today.
Hi, Julie. Good morning. How's it going?
Good. So before we get started with our conversation, can you share a little bit about Davidson Academy Online for those who may not be familiar?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Davidson Academy Online is a fully virtual middle and high school for profoundly gifted students. And it's offered to students across the US and across Canada. We have a strong connection with Davidson Academy of Nevada, which is located in Reno, Nevada. They are also a full-time day school for profoundly gifted students. And I love Davidson Academy of Nevada. I taught there for many years. But one of the problems is that students and families would have to relocate to Reno, Nevada in order to attend. And we wanted to come up with something that was available to students everywhere, regardless of where they were. So maybe the families couldn't pick up their lives and move to Reno. So we started this online program. We have been offering online classes since 2015. And then the fully virtual school was started up in 2017. So we're pre-COVID. We've been doing this online thing for a long time. And so students who come to us usually do their full schooling experience with us. We do offer some single classes for students who want to take classes just in English or just in math, but most of our students are with us full time. So we've been going strong for many years, and we have around 100 students this year. We have a full staff that is very aware of all of the needs of profoundly gifted students, and they are fully dedicated to our really interesting, unique student population. So that's who we are in a nutshell.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. And that's a great segue into what we're going to talk about today, which is, finding the right learning environment for your gifted student or twice exceptional student, right? Because many gifted students will have twice exceptionalities. And having gone through this myself as a parent, it can be really challenging to find the right school learning environment for your kid. And I spoke with your colleague Megan recently, and I know that this is a popular saying. I like to use it. I know you all do as well. That if you've met one gifted kid, you've met one gifted kid, right? Each
Right.
each student is unique, so it isn't like there's a one size fits all when it comes to finding the right situation. So, but I am curious for parents who may be kind of questioning is their child in the right situation? Should they maybe be looking at something different? Are there some typical signs that maybe the traditional classroom or the classroom they're in is not the best fit for their student?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do like that you said that there isn't a one size fits all. Yeah, each student is unique. They have a unique combination of needs, and there isn't necessarily a checkbox that we can go down. Like, is it have this? Does it have this? Does it have this? Every child is going to have their own checkbox and their own set of unique needs. And making a move to another school is a really big decision. Like if your child is already in school, and as a parent, I know you want to make sure that that move is going to be positive. And if your child isn't in school yet, then you want to make sure that you're getting off on the right foot. So this is big, right? We want
Mm-hmm.
school to be a positive place. I do think it depends a lot on what your goals are as a family. So if your child is already in school and they're happy, they have friends, they're not complaining about the schoolwork, they're finding intellectual stimulation either in the classroom or in their own individual pursuits or maybe with enrichment, they might be fine where they are. There is a lot to be said for having a happy, holistic environment for your child. And part of that happy, holistic experience is their social situation and their comfort with their teacher. So when students come to a place like Davidson, it's usually because something isn't working for them, and that could be strictly academic. Maybe the child really, really values that intellectual stimulation. Maybe they really want to be challenged. Maybe they really want to pursue something that is fascinating to them. There could be a social component. We know that some of that social mismatch that we see with gifted students has to do with their asynchronous development. And they really do need to be with their intellectual peers in a lot of cases to feel like they fit in. But so that decision doesn't have to be strictly academic. If the student is really happy in the regular classroom, it might be a good idea just to supplement the student's learning with enrichment classes rather than switching to a completely different program. So
Mm-hmm.
at Davidson, we do have this other program called Davidson Explore, and it is a supplemental enrichment program that students can take after their full-time learning. Usually it's for older elementary students or maybe middle school students, so they could take a single class with us to get that stimulation. That is a great choice for students who are really happy in their regular education environment. However, of course, we do see that gifted students tend to thrive when they're in that homogeneously grouped situation. And part of that is because they do feel like they're more socially at home with students and teachers who get them. They want to feel like they're with their tribe, they're with their group. There are some signs that parents could look for or things that parents can do to determine whether that regular classroom isn't quite the best fit. And I think first, naturally, is to listen to your child, right? Like, what are they
Mm-hmm.
saying? What are they saying about their classroom experiences? Are they happy? Are they frustrated? Are they looking for more or better learning experiences? And so I do think there's a lot of benefit to letting your child lead the way to a certain extent. And then as a parent, you can also look at the relationship between the child's abilities, like what your child's abilities are and how they are approaching their schoolwork. So if they're speeding through their homework with no issues and they want to move on to different, more interesting things, perhaps they're not being challenged enough because they're able to just zoom through and it's no big deal to them. But on the other side, if we see students who are refusing to do their homework, despite having the ability, like your child has the ability to do this thing and to complete it well, this could also be a sign that the classroom isn't challenging enough for them. They don't see this homework as valuable. They don't see it as interesting. And so this could be a sign of underachievement. We can also look at the kind of feedback that teachers are providing. So really great teachers, even teachers in the regular education classroom are able to give feedback to gifted students that stimulates them. even if they're getting 100%. And that's kind of what you want to look for. We don't want children to be punished because they're taking academic risks and going above and beyond. But if they are meeting the standards that the teacher has set, is the teacher still able to provide some kind of feedback that pushes the student forward? Are they able to offer recommendations? Are they giving them challenge problems as opposed to more of the same problems? Are they asking interesting questions, pushing students towards different resources? So if they're getting that kind of feedback, your child is probably with a great teacher. I've heard from parents at Davidson Academy Online that they'll review their child's writing and they'll see ways that their child can improve in their writing, but then they're receiving 100% from their teacher with no notes, just like a gold star. And
Mm-hmm.
and that's not going to stimulate the child's growth. It's
Right.
not interesting to them. They're not probably in an environment when they're going to be properly challenged or stimulated. You also asked about twice exceptionalism. Like what do you do if you have a child who is 2E? Some teachers don't have a strong understanding of what the needs of twice exceptional students are. And so having a conversation with the school and a conversation with the teachers can tell you a lot about whether that teacher is ready to support that twice exceptional student.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the final thing I would say about this question is looking at social relationships. Does your child have friends their own age that they're interested in hanging out with or around their own age? Or are they gravitating towards older students? Do they want to hang out with the teachers?
Yeah.
If that's the case, then there probably is also a social mismatch.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much good advice in there. And to me, the biggest takeaway in that is listen to your child. I think that sometimes as parents, particularly when our kids are younger, we're reticent to do that,
Mm,
like we think we're supposed to be the parent, we're supposed to
mm,
have all the answers and we're supposed to figure this all out for our kids. But, having being farther along in this journey, my kid is in college now, and I wish I had listened to my kid more when they were
oh,
younger, because they were trying to tell me a lot of these things, but I was like, oh, I should be the one to be figuring this out, and I wasn't listening enough. But I
mm,
think, a lot of times our kids know what they need,
sure.
and we can listen to that, right? I don't I'm sure there's a lot of parenting theories on that. Some people maybe don't agree with that, but that's where I come from on it. I believe a lot of times these kids are pretty mature that way, and they know what they need. We can listen to that, and we don't really need to second guess it. I don't think kids act out because they're looking for attention. I think they act out because they're not getting what they need,
Mm.
right? And there's a
Or
lot
they're
to learn
not.
from that.
Absolutely, or they're not being listened to.
Yeah, right.
So, of course, we know a lot as parents.
Mm-hmm.
We've been around the block and we're doing our research and
Yeah,
we think we know what our child needs. So, I think asking questions is a great
yeah,
way not just to understand what your child needs, but to help your child to understand themselves,
yeah, for
to
sure.
cultivate some self-awareness and self-knowledge.
Yeah. And, I mean, I think you touched on this a little bit, particularly, I mean, twice exceptionality certainly can make it a little bit more tricky sometimes because there may be executive functioning challenges and things like that make it a little harder. And I think certainly, though, things like anxiety can make it more difficult, right? Because there can be school refusal and things like
Mm,
that kind of come into this, that could be, kind of symptoms of school not being a good fit, or they could just be symptoms of other things that's going on with your kid. But I'm kind of curious, do you bump into that and have kind of help parents navigate those things as well?
oh, yeah, absolutely. That's something that we do quite a lot of at
Hmm.
Davidson Academy Online. We are very interested in helping our students to develop executive functioning skills, to
Hmm.
giving them a lot of social emotional support. And I think you're right that um, you have to find an environment that does have those kinds of supports, that does have those kinds of scaffolds. And a lot of that goes back to whether the school really understands twice exceptionalism
Yep.
and what a twice exceptional student needs. So, for example, if the child's gifted characteristics are prominent, but anxiety might be hampering them. Maybe the teacher is only seeing the 100% in the classroom. They're only seeing the achievement.
Mm-hmm.
I did have a student like this at one point. He was producing just brilliant writing, just beautiful. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I come to find out later from his mother that he's spending like 6 hours on a couple of paragraphs because he wants it to be just right, and he's very anxious about giving me his best work. And I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know that. I wouldn't have known that unless the parent had communicated that to me.
Right.
And then on the other side, if we're only seeing the learning difference or the
Mm-hmm.
struggle, um, then we're not seeing the gifted characteristics,
Yeah.
and we're not taking that strength-based approach.
Yeah.
And I think schools sometimes see one or the other. They don't see both.
Yeah.
And having a school that really gets both is really, really important. So I think parents are really going to want to have that discussion with teachers and with support staff about what their child's unique learning profile is. And like you said, they're going to be unique. Every child is a little bit different. And if you have a school that really understands that, you're more likely to have a good working environment for the student and also a good collaborative partnership with the school as a family.
Yeah.
Looking at that scaffolding, I think what you're looking for is
Yeah. I
whether
was going to
that,
ask, right? Like, how can you
yes,
kind of tease that out, right?
absolutely. Yeah. So a question that you can ask yourself as a parent is the executive functioning taught both explicitly and also in conjunction with the rest of the curriculum? So I'm of the opinion that executive functioning and also social emotional learning, which I think we'll chat about a little bit
Mm-hmm.
later,
We will.
is best when it's integrated into the
Mm-hmm.
curriculum. So it's not something that's separate.
Right. It's
It's
not a
not like,
class. It's not just a class you go
yes.
to, right?
Right. It's not like, and now we will look at calendars. Like,
Right.
no, like we are in our classroom. Let's
Mm-hmm.
put our calendar together. Or we are in our classroom looking at this big assignment. How can we chunk this out to find ways to make it approachable for all students?
Mm-hmm.
So if you are looking at the instruction that the teacher is giving and you're noticing that there's lots of executive functioning guidelines and scaffolding, things are broken down, they're giving recommendations for how long things should be taking, things like that, that school or that teacher really understands executive functioning and also how to teach executive functioning in manageable ways
Yeah.
to students.
Yep. Yeah, that's, and I think that's so important because it can be kind of hard, to evaluate, right, some of these maybe softer skill things,
Hmm.
right, when you're looking at a school, because it may not be that obvious, right, as you're looking at the curriculum or this, that, right, and the other thing, how do you really tell that? But I think those are great questions to ask, right, to better understand how they integrate these things. Also, thinking about the social and emotional piece of it. I think, when we think about online school, I'm in a fair number of parent forums, and it kind of breaks my heart how often I see, families posting about moving to other parts of the country or even parts of the world to try to find a better learning situation for their child, right? And so certainly online learning
Hmm.
offers a different
Hmm.
alternative, right? Where maybe you can stay where you're at and still give your child the learning that they need. But I think, we're kind of programmed to believe we have to go move somewhere else to go do that. And maybe part of that is because we believe that they need that in-person experience to kind of have the social experience that they need, or the social emotional experience they need. So, how do you address that in an online environment? How do you make sure kids get that social side of it, right? If they're in this virtual type of learning situation.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that we it's a question that we field a lot from
Mm-hmm.
parents who are interested in moving their kids to online learning. This past weekend, we just had our summer retreat for Davidson Academy Online, and it's a really lovely social experience where the students and their families come to Reno, Nevada, and we have a couple of days together where we get to see each other in person. The students play games, we host events for the parents. It really is just kind of a social experience. We like to say in online learning, we only see each other from like the shoulders up, and at the retreat we get to see each other's legs. Like we get to prove that we have legs, and it's really funny to see the different height differences with the students, and
Mm-hmm.
they have a fantastic time together. And those kinds of events are really vital for online learning programs. Like, do we have the summer retreat? Do we have a winter retreat? Are we actively cultivating social experiences for students? We like to take a holistic approach to gifted education at Davidson Academy Online. So they're not just little brains walking around. They are full human beings. They need to have social experiences. They need to have um, communal experiences with folks who are going through the same things that they are. So we have a lot of things that are actually integrated into our program at Davidson Academy Online. We have an advisory program called Oracle, where students are grouped in little we call them houses, kind of like Harry Potter, where they have a mythological creature that represents their house, and they get to play games with this small group. They get to talk through issues that are important to them. They do work on some executive functioning things. They do work on some social, emotional things, but we made time out of our academic day for that. And students meet in their house once a week to ensure that they have that touch point. We also have clubs. We have student council activities. So it's something that we take very seriously. So if it's something that you are worried about as a parent, like is my child going to have these social experiences, those are the kind of things that you want to look at. Like, does the program actually promote social experiences? Does it make time out for them? Does it give the students time to just be students together and not be so concerned about academics 24 hours a day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that is so important. And are there other things, like when evaluating an online program, whether that's Davidson or something else, like what are the other things that parents might want to look at, right? Because it's not like you can tour the school like you would, in real life type of a way. So when you're touring, and I'm air quoting, a virtual school, what else are you looking for? Like, what are some other things that might be important to look at?
Well, there's of course the academic side. Like, we
Mm-hmm.
want to look and see what the academic experience actually looks like for your child. Are
Mm-hmm.
they going to be working asynchronously in their room by themselves all day, every day? We don't want that. We don't
Mm-hmm.
want the student to just be sitting at the computer without any kind of interaction. Of course, we're using technology when
Mm-hmm.
we're learning online, but we want the technology to be a bridge between people. So, are we choosing the right platforms and the right tools that are bringing people together? When we ask students to write things on the discussion board, are there clear guidelines about how often they should be responding to their peers and what those responses should look like and how we support each other as a writing community? Do we have synchronous live sessions? Are we meeting on Zoom together? How many times a week are we doing that? Are there other tools such as Padlet, which is a really nice kind of like corkboard type of situation where you can leave ideas, you can also leave videos, you can leave pictures. Are there those kinds of tools being used to promote connection between students as opposed to students just kind of throwing information out there into the void? So if you are touring these schools and you are seeing an emphasis on connection and an emphasis on building a learning community and working collaboratively, you are in the place that values those kinds of things. It's not just sitting and learning by yourself every day.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's so important, right? And I do think there are ways you can suss that out, right? As you said, because they are going to have to rely very heavily on technology to do that naturally, right? But there are and ed tech is a space, that I work in quite a lot, and there are a lot of really cool tools
Hmm.
that you can use to facilitate that. And yeah, and I think you can look for those kinds of things that do really foster this type of interactivity, right? And really get, kids working together, not just like lasered in on the screen, all the time, right? There's
Right,
a
right.
different way to do that. So yeah, that's really I think that's a really thoughtful answer, right? And just some stuff to look for that people may not understand. I think sometimes tech gets a bad rap. And tech is really a tool, right? And it can be super useful when used the right way. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And it's something we tell our teachers as well. Like that, like you said, there are so many pieces of ed tech out there.
Mm-hmm.
You could be looking at ed tech apps all day and never like really exhaust the list. And so
Mm-hmm.
we tell our teachers like there is no pressure to use every single app out there. You want to find the one or two that bring your students together.
Yeah.
If you're using tech for the sake of tech, it's probably not good tech. If you're using it to create human connection and it's working well for your students and there's no barriers, that's probably the right tech to use.
That's right. Like tech can very much be a crutch, right? Or it can be this connector. Like we were talking about a tool like Kahoot, which
Hmm.
we actually use we used as like a team in my last job just because it was fun. Like we used it for team building, as adults, just because it was a fun thing to, for us to do as a team, right? Like there's
Right.
some very cool tools you can use that way that the kids love, adults love. It kind of works for everybody. It's very interactive. So
Yes.
yeah. So one thing I want to that I want to bring up is I know thinking back to when I was looking at at schools for my own child, I remember always kind of wishing that if I had just found the right school, maybe I could rest easy and not have to advocate so hard. If I could just find that right environment, then I could really not have to engage so much as a parent, truthfully, because I felt like I did so much advocating
Hmm.
and when I was not, when we were not in the right environments. But I'm not sure your job is ever done that way as a parent, at least when your kid's in primary, even in secondary a little bit, right? Like there's still a fair bit that you may have to do. So even if they're in, a school for gifted kids or 2E kids where they really get it, there may still be some advocacy that you have to do as a parent for your kid, right? Just to make sure that they're getting their needs met, especially as you're kind of finding your way in the beginning.
Yeah.
So, as an educator, what's a good way? What's a productive way, for a parent to have that collaboration with you? What does that look like, right? How can we do that well?
I love that question. I love it. I run one of the parent groups at Davidson Academy Online where we just foster parent to parent connections. And I run another group, another parent group for ECHA, and which is that European Council for High Ability. And we talk about this all the time. How could parents and families actually work together in order to best advocate for gifted students? And I think one really important thing that parents can figure out early on is what the school is able to do.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends a lot on the size of your school and the amount of resources that they can give to a single child. So most of the time, schools have to think about the bigger picture. They have to think about all of the students who are in their school and all of their needs. And sometimes it's difficult for them to give a certain amount of resources to a single child. But having that conversation with the teachers and with administrators and with counselors early and having this open, collaborative, productive conversation is really important. So you will understand what the school is able to provide, and then also telling the school, this is what I'm able to do. Here's how I see my role as a parent. Here are things that I can also do for you. So if you're able to tell the school, I'm able to do this thing, I can volunteer in this way, here's something I'm good at, I guarantee you're going to be in with that school because they're like, oh, you can do this thing. That's
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. We would love to use that energy. So having those conversations, super duper important. I would also say it's really important to request a meeting. I know sometimes as parents we think, oh, I'm just going to pop in at the end of the school day and ask a question and see if I can, talk for maybe 10, 15 minutes with that teacher. The teacher doesn't always have that space right then and there. But if you're able to request a meeting and to say, this is specifically what it's about, here are the things I would like to talk about, I think you're going to wind up with a much more productive conversation because the teacher will be able to prepare the right information for you. They're going to dedicate that time and space for you. They're going to be very open to listening because they're not rushing off to something else. So requesting that meeting, I think, is very important.
Yeah.
Um, another thing you can think about as well, and this is a little bit different, I think, perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
is as you find programs that work well for you and your family, is moving away from advocating for your child and teaching them how to self-advocate. I think it's a really, really vital skill. And that doesn't mean you're gone. It doesn't
Hmm.
mean like you back off completely and it's completely on you, kid. It means you are telling them how to say, these are my needs. Here are the things that I'm hoping for. Can I try this special thing, whatever it is, whatever the child is interested in, and getting them to speak with their teachers. It's going to be a lifelong skill for them. And that can be really difficult for parents. I wrote an article earlier this year, maybe it was last year, and it's called The Changing Role of Parents in Gifted Education Programs. And I wrote it for Parenting for High Potential through NAGC. And it talks about the transition that parents have to go through as they move into gifted programs. So the kids will have a transition because they're moving from a regular education classroom to a gifted program, and there's a lot of changes that go along with that. There's a lot of changes for parents as well. They're moving from being that lead advocate or sometimes that lead teacher because they've been homeschooling into that support role. And that's hard. And so understanding that change might be happening and that you are giving some of the power to the school and some of the power to your child, that's difficult. So just understanding that a change is going to be taking place is pretty important.
Yeah, I mean that really is. And I will say, like, there's a few takeaways in that for me. One is, really understanding that you and, as a parent, you and the school are in this together. You're not adversaries. And I do think
Right.
sometimes there can be this sort of, especially if you're a little frustrated that your student isn't getting what they need, you can come at it from this sort of adversarial place, and that's never going to be a productive place to come from, right?
Right.
Like, you always have to come at it with a curiosity, right? A consideration, and a let's work this out together. It's like any relationship. I think that's a good, healthy way to look at it, is we have a relationship here that we have to try to maintain. And to your
Right.
point, setting a meeting, giving a heads up what the meeting is about, what you want to discuss, so that the educator, the teacher can be prepared for that meeting. You're not going to spring it on them, right? Like,
Hmm.
they know
Hmm.
what we're going to talk about. It's just like good, healthy relationship dynamics that you can bring
Yes.
to this, right? That will make it go a lot better. But your point about teaching your child to self-advocate is such an important one, because if you have a younger child and you haven't gone through this transition yet, if you've been heavily advocating for your child, say in elementary, when they go to middle school, you'll start to feel teachers kind of wanting you to step out. And when they get to high school, you'll really feel it, right? Like, teachers are
Hmm.
like, mm-mm, like you can't, you have to teach your child to do that, because you can't continue. I don't want to use the helicopter term, but you just can't continue to do that. It just doesn't
Right.
work, right? It's and they really need to learn how to do it, because especially if they go off to college, they don't have an IEP and all these things anymore. They've got to learn how to ask for what they need. They just don't have
Hmm.
those same built-in accommodations and things, right?
Right.
They have to be able to self-advocate. So I know, having gone through all these transitions, if there's one thing that I'm glad I did, was really teach, my own child how to ask for what they need, and they're very good at it now. Um, but it was a learning, right? Some of that was modeling, some of that was coaching them, how to do it, and some of it was letting them try it and have it sometimes not go so well, and then let's
Right.
talk about that and talk about how you could do it better, right? But there is this that skill is so important, and it will serve them well in so many aspects of life later on, beyond school, of
I
course.
agree.
But yeah.
Yes.
So, as we wrap up, I want to acknowledge that, it can be really stressful and challenging to find the right school for your child, especially when they're gifted or twice exceptional. I remember when I first learned that my own child, was gifted, and then as we kind of struggled with learning environments, and we did, we changed schools like 3 times in 4 or 5 years, right? Trying to find the right learning environment. And then, of course, we learned about twice exceptionalities and that were involved that made it even more challenging. And it was my number one stressor as a parent, just feeling a lot of one
Hmm.
responsibility to find an environment that was going to challenge, my kid, because I knew that Remy was, just kind of bored and not in the right place, and then was in a place where they really didn't get Remy, and were, like just getting a lot of negative redirection that was also not productive. And it was just a major stressor trying to find that right learning environment. And for, a parent who's in that place right now, who might be listening to this podcast, as an educator and someone who helps guide people probably through some of this, like what advice do you have for those parents, kind of help them get through what might be a bumpy period?
Yeah, I have a lot of sympathy for those parents. I really get it. I really understand. It's one of the hardest things that I think parents of gifted students have to go through, especially if your child's twice exceptional.
Mm-hmm.
There's plenty of research out there that says that parents of twice exceptional students sometimes have to work twice as hard to make sure that their child's needs are being met. I've had that struggle myself, so a lot of sympathy for
Mm-hmm.
folks who are in the trenches trying to figure it out. I think the most important piece of advice I can give is that you're not alone. There are lots of other parents who are in the same boat. And I think you should talk with those parents specifically. A lot of parents don't understand giftedness. They don't understand twice exceptionality, and they don't necessarily want to hear about the struggles that you're having with your brilliant child. They have struggles of their own. So if you are talking with parents of gifted students, of twice exceptional students, you don't have to explain a whole lot. You don't have to explain the background. You can just talk about the experiences you're having, and they'll be like, yes, yes, I get it. So talk with those parents, see what challenges they have worked through, what successes they have, what's worked for them, and then you may be able to find things that you can also take for yourself. We talked earlier about open houses as well. Attend those open houses. If you have the time, if you're able to pop in and to see what's going on with the school, that's a really great way to get a feel for a program to see if it's going to be a good fit for you. So we host open houses for Davidson Academy Online and for Davidson Explore. And if you go to davidsononline.org, you can see all the information about that. But a lot of online programs are going to have these kinds of open houses where you can see exactly what the learning day is going to look like. You can ask questions. You can see if they're doing the social emotional learning, if they're doing the executive functioning training. So going to those kinds of things is really important. I think the last piece of advice I have is that the right fit might not be the perfect fit. And I think sometimes we're looking for like it's got to be perfect. It's got to have everything. But I think you have to figure out what your non-negotiables are for your gifted child or your twice exceptional child. Like what are the things that are a must? Is it the academic acceleration? Is it the social emotional learning? Is it a strong counseling presence who's able, like these folks are able to help your child through any struggles that they might be having. Figure out what those non-negotiables are. And if that program is able to tick most of those boxes, it could be worth a try. So keeping that holistic fit in mind, not just the academic fit, I think is going to be really helpful in your journey.
Yeah, that's great advice. It kind of reminds me, like, some people may relate to this, some may not, but I use like a weighted decision matrix to make these kind of
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
decisions, where I like have all my criteria and certain things have different weights. And it's a very like data driven way to make decisions. I mean, I make a lot of gut decisions too, but when it comes to this stuff where it's easy to kind of get, kind of spin out about all the many variables. I like to look at a weighted decision matrix and it's very helpful.
I love it. That's executive functioning at work, right?
Yeah, it really is. It's also kind of a nerdy way to do things, but it works.
I love
Sometimes
it.
it kind of takes, it makes it very black and white. It makes it easier to kind of, be like, okay, yeah, like this makes sense. This helps me really, figure out what matters and prioritize on what matters most. And I think that's great advice because it is easy to kind of get lost. There's a lot of
Hmm.
variables, and then you can kind of get into this analysis paralysis. So yeah, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate, you sharing your insights with us and sharing, your experiences. And I know you have a ton. I know you've got a deep level of experience in education and particularly gifted education. And I know that this is going to be such a valuable resource for our listeners. So thank you so much for sharing it with us today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It was a really nice conversation, and I really hope that some of the things today are helpful to some parents out there.
Thanks for tuning in to the Exceptional Girls podcast. If you liked today's episode, it would mean the world to me if you'd subscribe, leave a rating and review, and recommend it to just one other person who you think would benefit from listening. Even a small act of support helps the podcast reach more people, which in turn helps increase awareness and understanding of exceptionality in girls. And if you have suggestions for future episodes, please share them. You can connect with me, your host, Julie Withrow, through our website at exceptionalgirlspodcast.com/contact.